even though the best player in baseball was a free agent this offseason and ended up signing a ridiculous $700 million contract with absurd deferrals, this offseason, like so many, too many in recent years, has been a total snooze fest, but we've got an idea on how to fix it.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide episodes 3 days a week for now, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I am a lifelong fan of this team. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day, 3 days a week for now, 5 days a week, 10 months out of the year. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Check us out there if you haven't already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And coming up on today's show, it is part 2 of my conversation with Millard from Locked On D-backs. We spoke for over an hour, and I aired the first half of that conversation yesterday. And here's part 2, where we're going to get into how to fix, an idea at least, on how to fix the MLB offseason, which is a bore compared to other sports, and just frankly doesn't matter even how it compares to other sports. This is an entertainment business, and the MLB offseason is straight up boring. And we're also going to break down the NL West. It's a complicated division. Yes, you've got the Dodgers, but where do the D-backs stand? They went to the World Series. Where do the Padres stand with all that talent, but then offloading a lot of it? And then where do the Giants stand, and what do they have to do to kind of get back into that mix, and where are they with the moves they've already made? So without further delay, we're going to jump into those topics with Millard from Locked On D-backs next. To me, I feel like the biggest issue on the table right now is the slowness and the boring nature of the MLB offseason, and that we've got to think of a way to fix it, because I do not believe that it benefits anybody, not teams, not players, and certainly not fans. Like if you're a fan of a team and you're like following the offseason, it's like torture. You're just like
so slow.
Like it's slow. It's like it drags on, and just like days and days go by and nothing happens. And it's because there's no deadline. And so teams and players feel like they can just wait each other out and kind of wait for somebody to kind of, you're playing chicken with each other for 3-4 months, 5 months even. And like the year when Bryce Harper and Manny Machado didn't sign forever, and they were like 25-year-old studs, best like top 10 players. Yeah. Like, and like there's no Bryce Harper didn't sign until late February. It's like, and it wasn't even a crazy contract. Looking back on it, I mean, it looks super reasonable compared to some of the. I mean, it was 13 years, 330, which you know every team in baseball would want a piece of that now. I feel like not every team would pay it, but.
Yeah, he turns into the best player in the sport when the postseason turns on. It's like, what is that not what you pay for a superstar? Like, wouldn't you want Bryce Harper? Like, isn't that what you pay a superstar for? Like, whatever the contract is, like to come in and just smash home runs and put the fear of God in pitchers when you're at the plate. Like, I know as a D-backs fan, at one point in the NLCS, after like game 1 and game 2, where he like led off both games with a home run, I'm like, can we just not pitch to him the rest of the season or the rest of the series? Like, I don't care if Schwarber goes off. I don't care if Brandon Marsh or JT Realmuto go off. But, like, we cannot let Bryce Harper kill us. Like, I would rather walk him with the bases loaded, nobody out, than pitch to Bryce Harper, because that's how scary he was. But the idea of a deadline is kind of interesting, because we do that with the foreign players when they post. I've never really thought about that. But I would be kind of interested if it's like, 6 weeks before spring training, all free agents have to sign, or they have to, I don't know, wait until this day of the regular season to sign or something. I think that would be kind of interesting because there has to be a way to move the offseason quicker, because you look at like the NBA, like 70% of free agents are signed within the first week of the NBA because teams and agents and players are talking before free agency even starts. Like, maybe we need to add more tampering in Major League Baseball. Maybe there's not enough tampering going on beforehand because everyone's already signed. Like, as soon as free agency starts for the NBA, you see like 80 deals happen. It's like, how did you negotiate terms before free agency even started? How was that allowed? So maybe we need a little bit more tampering going on in the MLB offseason. But one thing that I have discussed in my pod, Ben, I want to maybe throw out to you real quick, since you threw the deadline idea at me. I kind of wouldn't hate the idea of doing like term limits on contracts. Like, say you could only sign Ohtani to a 5-year max deal. Maybe there's not a limit on how much he can make annually, but I kind of don't like the 10-year plus deals because I kind of want to see Ohtani hit the market again. I want to see Yamamoto hit the market again. I kind of don't like the idea of one player just signing with a team for the next 2 decades. Like, I kind of want to see these guys hit free agency every 5 to 6 years, because I think that would also add to the intrigue of free agency if every year was like the last couple of years. We had all these loaded shortstops, and you had all these pitchers. The pitching class has been really good too. I just want to see more star players in the pool, and I think signing these 10-year plus deals, I think that kind of hurts the sport a little bit too, just from like an off-season, off the field engagement with the fans and the teams.
Yeah, my first thought on that is like, when the way the system is set up though is that the players don't reach free agency usually until they're around 30, right? And so if you put like a 5-year limit, then it would really hurt players, I think, because then they would reach free agency at an age at which the teams would no longer, for the vast majority of them, like if you're 35, unless you're like Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, and some rare others, Ohtani, they're not going to offer you a lot, and so you do a lot better for yourself as a player. I think that's why they end up getting these long-term deals, is because if they took a 5-year deal, if like in the open market, if they took a 5-year deal, they would definitely, I think, be leaving money on the table, and so then you'd probably want to push free agency earlier, which is something the players would love. Like, instead of having to wait for 6 years of service time, like this was something they wanted in the last CBA, was to push it forward to like 5 years of service time instead of 6 to reach free agency. But the league like considers that a non-starter, and so it's hard because these two sides like are, I don't want to say enemies, but they're very much, they have conflicting incentives. And the one thing I want to add about the deadline is because I've thought about this a lot, and I feel kind of dumb because I've never come to this idea on my own that I heard on a podcast. To be fair, it was someone who is very smart and involved in baseball who mentioned the idea on the podcast, and that's the president of baseball operations for the Giants, Farhan Zaidi, said recently on a podcast that I was listening to, he was kind of asked about the slow off season, right? And what he mentioned was having like a 3 or 4 week deadline, just kind of throwing out the amount of time, could be 5, 6 weeks, whatever, but for multi-year deals. A deadline for multi-year deals.
Let me tell our listeners about this little thing that's really important to your everyday health called Jace Medical, because I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. This is scary. I can't imagine more helpless feeling than a significant other dealing with the supply chain issue that kept them from life-saving medication that they desperately needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinuses, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order.
And so that way it doesn't like lock players out if they miss out on the deadline. Because I've always thought like you can't have a deadline because I feel like you can't have the players give up that much leverage where like if they don't sign, they just like can't sign. I feel like that's too much to give up. But if it's a deadline for multi-year deals, the players still probably wouldn't want to go for that. But at the same time, Zaidi did mention that he brought it up, with agents who obviously are on the player's side. And he said he hasn't heard a lot of pushback because they are in the same boat where they don't feel like this waiting game is really benefiting anybody. And for anyone who's pushing back on me listening, like you mentioned, there's deadlines for these international players. They've got these for Korean players right now. It's 30 days from when they get posted, and the Japanese posting window is now 45. It was 30, but it's now 45. But like you look at Yamamoto, he got the largest ever contract for a pitcher, topping Garrett Cole by 1 million. And you look at Jung Hoo Lee, and you look at the preseason or pre-off-season expectations for what his contract would be, and then what he ultimately got, and it exceeded it by quite a lot. And so to me, if you look at these contracts that these guys with deadlines are getting, they're not leaving money on the table. It's just simply forcing the action. And so I think something like that would be so good for the sport because it is an entertainment business, and I feel like fans hate the off season. And that's not good for the game. And I don't think the teams like it. The agents don't like it. And the fans don't like it. You and I as fans and as like reporters or whatever we are don't like it. And so that's the best idea I've heard, because then, guys who miss out on that multi-year deal, they can still sign and get a huge 1-year deal. Like that's the thing. If somehow Ohtani didn't get that multi-year deal he wanted, because it wasn't 700 million or whatever. Imagine how much he'd make on a 1-year deal, because there'd be so much competition. It's like, we can get this guy without the long-term risk. So I still feel like players would get huge paydays even on 1-year deals. Yeah. I don't know. Certain players would probably be hurt by it, but for the vast majority of players, I think supply and demand would kind of play out, and they would probably end up getting essentially their market value anyway. And I don't know much about the NBA and the NFL and the free agency. I've heard what you said 1,000 times. I don't follow it nearly as closely, but that sounds so much more exciting. And people have said to me well, what's the difference? Because then you just have to wait the rest of the offseason. Once all the activity happens, you just sit around and wait. But the difference is you get excited about your team. Christmas comes around, you could buy the jerseys of the players that you got, and you just kind of go into season mode and start thinking about the team that you've built, versus agonizing over what are they going to do for 4 months. And maybe they do something big, but you suffered all the way up to the point where they do something.
Yeah, because we're still 4 days out of spring training, and so many teams are still incomplete. So you don't even know the exact roster that you're going to have going to next season. But
not
in the NBA,
close.
after 2 weeks of free agency, you're my team's already locked in. Maybe you make one more trade or something, maybe a little signing, but all the big pieces, they're already locked into place. So it's you can kind of plan better for the future, and kind of for our podcast too, it might be a little bit better, planning if we knew who's going to be on the team, locked in for the foreseeable future. So I like that idea a lot of the deadline, because if I'm a guy like Aaron Judge and it's I want to go back to the Yankees, but maybe we're at a stalemate on the contract, maybe I'm you know what, out of spite, I'm going to go sign with the San Francisco Giants, 1 year, $50 million. Then I'm going to renegotiate with them in the middle of the season. So I do think that's a pretty fun idea, and hopefully we could get something implemented to speed up this MLB offseason. But Ben, we talked a lot about the offseason so far in today's podcast. I want to ask you, with the Dodgers and the D-backs and the Giants, who we think is going to take the NL West crown in 2024, and what other moves you think your team still might need to make this offseason to potentially win the NL West next season. And if you think the D-backs or the Giants might win the NL West next year, why not go to FanDuel Sportsbook and place a little futures bet down, because the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers could get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's it. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, and more. My favorite thing to do is the same game parlay. Whenever the Lakers are playing a mediocre or below 500 team, I take Anthony Davis over in points, AD over in rebounds, and the Lakers money line. Now, let me tell you, that third leg of the parlay hasn't been hitting as recently, but when it does, I love seeing money go into my pocket. And if you want the same feeling, go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And we are back here with Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants, wrapping up the podcast. One more segment to go. And I want to talk about the NL West, Ben, because, the Dodgers have spent some money this offseason. The D-backs, we see the Giants, they signed the most expensive foreign player ever, brought in former D-back friend Robbie Ray. How are you feeling about the NL West right now? How do you like how it's going to shake up? Do you have any strong predictions for what the division might be next year? Do you think the Padres potentially could be a sneaky under the radar team? What's your feeling right now in the NL West?
Well, you mentioned earlier the Dodgers. You can't wait for the discourse once they win 130 games and then get swept in the first round or whatever. So I'm with you on that. I think you'd have to be taking crazy pills not to pick the Dodgers to win the NL West, and we've been doing this for several years now, and I feel like that's been the story pretty much every year. Is when we do our roundtable with the other hosts of the division. It's always been the Dodgers, except, they're actually last year, I take it back, there were quite a few Padres picks, and just goes to show how unpredictable this game is. And so as it stands now, I think the Dodgers are far and away the top team in the division. It's not remotely close. The Padres are an interesting team because they're subtracting, they had all these stars and people thought they would compete with the Dodgers, but they traded Juan Soto, and Blake Snell is a free agent. Josh Hader is a free agent, and Yu Darvish is 38 years old all of a sudden. And so, and he signed for $1 million more years, which is crazy. Padres could be in trouble. I mean, they're a team that definitely could have some problems down the road. And I did say that actually going into last year, but, and then you've got, I think again, once again, the D-backs and the Giants kind of live in a similar realm. They're not similar teams in the way they play, and the style of play. But hey, look, like you said, the D-backs won 84 games. The Giants won 79. It's not like there was a huge difference there. I
guess that's true.
And the Giants fell apart in the last 2 weeks. I don't know if you remember, but the Giants held on to playoff spot for. I mean, the D-backs fell apart too in the middle of the season.
We did. Yeah, we did for
big
a while
time.
There.
Yeah, we around the All-Star break.
Yeah, we were one of the worst teams in baseball for a 6-week stretch there.
Yeah. And it was looking okay, D-backs went down, Giants were coming up, and unfortunately the season continued a little bit longer than I would have liked. I would have liked to stop the count at around 140 games, but instead we played 162, and things went real south for the Giants. D-backs got hot, but I just continue to feel like both of our teams. I don't know. The D-backs probably. I think they look like an above 500 team and a wild card contender, but I don't see them as like a 95 win team, most likely, but somewhere in that 84 to 90 or 88. I don't know. I'm just throwing out numbers. They're pretty good. They're pretty good. And young players getting better, which is part of it with them. With the Giants, I think they have work to do. Like, I don't, if they're done now, then I would definitely have them below the D-backs. And the Padres are like this total enigma to me because they had Soto, they had Hader, they had Snell winning the Cy Young Award, and they still were an 82-80 team. They won 3 more games than the Giants. Like, it kind of doesn't make sense. And then you lose all those players. But I think they massively underperformed. Like, their record in 1-run games was crazy bad. Their record in extra innings was insanely bad. And so I anticipate just kind of natural improvement for them just by kind of, if they were to like replay the season, I feel like they win like 10 more games. Like, they just had a weird season with all the talent they had, but then they lose a lot of guys, and I don't know if they're done yet. And so as it stands now, Dodgers, I mean, it might be time to pick the D-backs as second place for me.
Might be time, yeah. It better
and
be
it might,
time, yeah.
I mean, they did go to the World Series after all.
Yeah.
But hey, I think the Giants are not done, and I would not be surprised if they go out and sign another player or two for $100+ million this offseason. Like the top 4, the Boris 4, Snell, Montgomery, Matt Chapman, Cody Bellinger. I see them getting at least one of those guys. And we can go back and roll the tape if I'm wrong and call me out on it. But I still think that they need to do that in order to stay competitive here. Otherwise, they're looking like, depending on how the Padres do, a 4th place team. And I think we know poor Paul Holden and his Rockies are going to project in last.
Yeah.
So, but with that being said, I want to hear what you have to say about all that, including on the Giants and the Padres and your D-backs.
Yeah, I mean, Dodgers will give them the division for now. I mean, on paper, they're going to be loaded. D-backs, I think we got to lock them into number 2. Coming off the World Series appearance, address the third base, brought back Gurriel, signed Erod to number 3. And honestly, if we get one more bat, because Mike Hazen's talked about adding one more bat, one more DH, and JD Martinez has been linked all over to the D-backs. Like, if we get him, I think that's a cherry on top to the offseason. You got your rotation locked in 1 through 4. Your lineup's going to have like Carroll, Marte, Walker, Suarez, maybe JD, maybe you're going to have Moreno in there. Like, I think they're legit could be like 7 deep. So I really do like this D-backs team a lot, but I don't need us to win 95 games, and they probably won't. Like, I just want to be the Philadelphia Phillies, win 85 to 88 games, and then just be built for the postseason, because I think this D-backs team is built more for the playoffs than they are for the regular season, which I think is all that matters. Like, you could go out there and win 115 games in the regular season, but if you flame out like the Braves or Dodgers in the postseason, like, no one is going to remember the 162 game marathon that you had to go through. All they're going to remember is the heartbreak at the end of the season. So I would much rather just be 88 wins and just get into the dance and then see what happens from there. The Giants, I mean, I definitely think they need to add a couple of those players that you talked about. For me, it just depends on how that young talent progresses next season, because I like Logan Webb. I like a couple other players in their lineup, but if the young talent doesn't improve, if they don't continue to develop, like, it doesn't really matter who you sign in the offseason, because you need those foundational pieces that you guys develop internally to take you to the next level. So right now, the Giants, I wouldn't say I love them on paper, but I don't think they're going to be bad, because I never like the Giants on paper, and then they're always a 500 team or better. So they will probably be better than my expectations level for them heading to the season. And the Padres, I think, are the biggest wild card potentially heading to next season, because if they're bad by the trade deadline, like, that could be a full tear down rebuild where it's like the only guy you're keeping is Tatis, and who knows about everyone else on that roster. Like, you might even look at Manny Machado trades. You might look at Bogarts and Darvish and Musgrove. Like, I don't know. Like, it could get really dangerous for that Padres situation, because reports were coming out the end of this past season that they were taking out loans just to meet the payroll and stuff like that. So, like, the way that they built this thing has been so crazy, like giving the money to Bogarts instead of re-signing Juan Soto, trading all that for Juan Soto just to trade him once again. Like the Padres are kind of a mess right now. And of course the Rockies, I mean, Nolan Jones, he's good. They got a couple of interesting young guys. Like Nolan Jones, actually a lot better than I realized.
Yeah.
I had a crossover with Paul Holden like a month ago, and he put me on to Nolan Jones. I looked at those numbers. I was like, damn, all right, this guy might be a legit stud that they have here. But the rest of that roster, I don't know. So I definitely have Dodgers number 1, D-backs number 2 as a playoff wild card contender, like you said. And then the Giants, like, you never know. They could be sneaky. I just think the NL is actually kind of deep. When you look at the Braves, the Marlins are sneaky. The Phillies are, of course, going to be there. The Central, I mean, that's going to be pretty weak. But the NL West will probably send at least 2 teams to the postseason. And maybe if the Giants are lucky, maybe they could be that 3rd team that gets sent to the playoffs. How do you feel about that? You like that?
I mean, it could be 4, right? Because you get the division winner and then you get 3 wild card teams. But yeah, I don't see that happening because, like you said, the Phillies and I feel like
the NL East has to send 2.
I would think so. The Marlins, they had crazy, like they're kind of the inverse Padres last year, where they had an extremely good record in 1-run games, and I believe they also had a negative run differential.
And they're kind of a frustrating team this offseason. Just real quick, because it's like there's talks like they're out on Jorge Soler, who was a monster for them last year. And it's like, we know offense is like the only thing that they need because they're like 6-7 deep in that rotation with like dudes under 25, but yet they don't want to spend money on players who were good for them this past year. Like, I just don't understand that philosophy. I don't understand firing their executive, who I thought was the executive of the year last year, Kim. So I don't know what's going on in Marlins world right now.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Marlins is they always tend to kind of shoot themselves in the foot even when things are going well. Like historically, they've put together, they've like finally built good teams, and then this isn't what they've done now. But then they like trade away a bunch of guys, and so I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of took a step back. But I feel like the Mets. I mean, you can't sleep on the Mets either with their. Well, they did trade away like a lot of guys, but still, I feel like you can't totally throw them out as a team that could. They've still got some talent. You know, they got Lindor, Pete Alonso. Starting rotation kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit after you lose Scherzer and Verlander, but yeah, I mean, for the Giants, they basically want. That's a great point, by the way, about the young talent. Like that is 100% right that they need. And the thing is, they've got some guys. Like they've got some guys who have arrived in the major leagues who are pretty high end prospects. Probably, you know, not household names, but guys who debuted in the major leagues this year. We're talking like 21-year-olds who have really high upside, like Kyle Harrison.
Who's the guy we should like? Who's the guy that we should be on the lookout for? That's the young.
I'm saying Kyle Harrison. This is a starting pitcher, left-handed pitcher. Kind of like, I mean, I don't want to throw unfair comps out there, but like, kind of like Carlos Rodon, Chris Sale type mold, where you're talking power lefty, like overpowering fastball. Maybe a little Robbie Ray in him with some command being like a problem at times for him. But if he can, you know, just throw strikes, he can be completely dominant. And he's 21 years old. He may be 22 at this point, but he has the potential to, and they actually have a lot of arms, probably not of that same like frontline starter potential, but like, you know, good pitcher. Like look up, you know, Tristan Beck kind of quietly had some pretty good numbers for them and just performed well. If you just watched him pitch, he pitched well. And then you've got like a 21 or 22-year-old Luis Matos, who a lot of people had as like a top 15 prospect by the time he arrived. If you look at his AAA numbers, they're just off the charts. And Marco Luciano, like there's actually quite a few guys. And Patrick Bailey, I guess he's not really a rookie anymore, but you know, he became like a total stud defensively. But Kyle Harrison is the guy to watch. And hey, Jung Hoo Lee is also a rookie, so they've got several. Like this is Maria Guardado of MLB.com covers the Giants. She said, you know, like a hot take was like a Giant winning Rookie of the Year this year, and I think that that's a pretty solid like hot take because they've got some guys, and like you said, I think that is the key for them. If one or two of those guys break through and become really good players, hopefully even more than that. Like Logan Webb kind of came out of nowhere, by the way, to become like one of the best pitchers in the game. Not a lot of people knew who he was either before they developed him into what he is now. But look out for Kyle Harrison. He'll probably be in that opening day rotation. He's nasty. Just when he's on, he looks like untouchable, and he's super young.
All right, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow on the show, I'm going to be breaking down the Giants settling with 3 players who are arbitration eligible, reaching new deals with Thairo Estrada, Lamont Wade Jr., and Tyler Rogers. They did not reach an agreement with J.D. Davis. What does that mean? And also getting to some mailbag questions. And if there's any activity for the Giants, we'll get to that as well. So anyway, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out tremendously. So thank you in advance, and thank you so much to everyone who's done so already. Thanks again for listening. You are now, and I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. You are now Locked On Giants.